Most of us spend our idle moments lost in daydreams, a passive theater of wishing and wandering. But right beneath that surface noise, an entirely different, highly autonomous reality is constantly operating in the shadows. These everyday inner cinemas feel deep, but they rarely provoke lasting psychological change. We remain the unchallenged directors of the fantasy, safely insulated within our conscious ego. Carl Jung realized that to truly bridge the gap between our waking minds and our hidden depths, we needed a deliberate method. He called it active imagination, a structured descent into the psyche, demanding complete, waking participation. Analyzing a dream after the fact is a post-mortem. Active imagination, instead, creates a live encounter, dragging the raw energy of the unconscious into the light of day to be dealt with in real time. Jung's closest collaborator, Marie-Louise von Franz, codified this demanding process into 4 distinct clinical stages in her work on psychotherapy. Here, in her text, she outlines the exact methodology, starting with the most notoriously difficult step, creating a vacuum. The first phase requires the absolute silencing of the conscious ego. You must shut off the constant hum of your thoughts, judgments, and desires. Imagine your mind as a cramped, noisy room. You must clear out every piece of furniture, knock down the walls, and step out into a vast, featureless expanse, waiting for a signal you do not control. This is intensely uncomfortable. The mind hates a void. Practitioners almost always panic in this silence and attempt to forcefully invent an image out of sheer impatience, ruining the experiment before it even begins. No true psychological work can proceed until the ego surrenders its grip on the steering wheel, allowing the internal narrative to arise on its own terms. If the mind is held as a true vacuum, the second stage begins automatically, the constellation. An unprompted, spontaneous image will eventually well up from the unconscious. It might be a voice, a geometric shape, or an animal taking form. It arrives fully autonomous, entirely indifferent to your expectations. At this exact moment, von Franz notes 2 common mistakes. The analytical mind tries to freeze the image to dissect what it means, or, conversely, the observer becomes too passive, letting the scene morph uncontrollably like a fever dream. The correct approach is a delicate, focused tension. You must watch the figure sharply and let it behave exactly as it wishes, without interfering or looking away. This manifested figure is an objective fragment of your own hidden psychology, granted a temporary form to allow for direct waking observation. But simply seeing the image is insufficient. Von Franz insists that you must move into the 3rd stage, crystallization. The vision must be forced into the physical world. You have to write down its exact words, paint its colors, or physically sculpt its form with your own hands. Why? Because the ego is a master of denial. If you leave the encounter entirely in your head, you will wake up the next morning and dismiss the experience as a weird dream. Giving it physical mass makes it undeniable. Von Franz issues a severe clinical warning here. Opening this door is highly dangerous. For individuals with latent psychosis or borderline conditions, pulling these raw archetypes into reality without clinical supervision can trigger a literal psychological break. But for those who can withstand it, this act of creation is the vital alchemical step. It permanently bridges the ethereal realm of the psyche with the solid ground of waking reality. Which brings us to the final phase. As detailed here in her text, stage 4 is the moral confrontation, where most practitioners fail. You must interact with the materialized figure ethically, treating it as an autonomous entity with its own rights rather than a puppet. Von Franz recounts the case of a man whose active imagination produced a terrifying demon. As it chased him through a desert, he simply tried to use his conscious mind to imagine the demon exploding into pieces, treating the scenario like a harmless video game. Jung heavily criticized this approach. He asked the man, "What would you do in real life?" Internal crises demand real-world permanent solutions. You must fight, negotiate, or stand your ground, using only the tools you actually possess. Psychological resolution only happens when we drop the safety net, set genuine boundaries, and engage in honest, ethical combat with our inner demons. Successfully moving through these 4 stages, from the initial silence to the final ethical struggle, gradually shifts the center of gravity in the psyche. This process culminates in the realization of what Jung identified as the self. This realization creates the transcendent function, a permanent, structural bridge between the conscious intellect and the primal unconscious. It enables a fluid, continuous exchange of information, ending the state of internal war that defines most of human life. The fragments of your personality are no longer at war. You have brought the hidden parts of your nature into the light and made peace. True self-knowledge is never found by quietly analyzing our past from a safe distance. It requires the terrifying courage to step into the dark and actively commune with the strangers living inside our own minds.